Okay, today we are going to wrap up the story of Martha and Mary. One thing I thought about this week, I've thought about it before, there's some other probably scriptures that you probably think the same thing, and that is we are given such a small sliver of Martha and Mary's life. I mean, just a tiny little glimpse at their life. Yet God saw fit to record that for our benefit. Now the question might arise, well, what can we learn out of such a small little glimpse into these two women's lives that would benefit us and everybody else after them? That's the question you got to be thinking about when you're going through something like this. So brief, but yet there's something there.
What to prioritize in our life.
That's good answer. We're going to delve into that a little bit here. We're on page, at a little more in detail, page 73, I believe. Is it 73? Let me see. No, 75. Point B. Well, we'll start just before that, number 3 there. And then we'll get into some questions. But some of these questions get answered through us going through this. So I'm not going to spend, we're not going to have quite as much time on the questions. What we can, we will. But a lot of this gets answered through just reading through here and some of our discussion. So there won't be a need to spend too much time on that. But I think in this section right here on page 75 gets to the crux of this. I don't know if you've ever thought about that before. I have. That, man, there's just tiny little glimpse here, just a few passages. But yet God saw fit to record this for our benefit. And that's what we need to be thinking about. What am I supposed to be getting out of this? And so that's what we're trying to answer here. And that's a good answer, and there's more to it than that, but that's a real good answer right there. So, on page 75, up there on number 3, we'll start right there. In contrast, Mary was so consumed with the opportunity to sit at the feet of Jesus that for the moment nothing else mattered. Isn't that an interesting statement? Nothing else mattered to her at the time. Worshipping him and listening to him was 100% focus of her energies. So it must be with ours. Have we found the one thing? The one thing is mentioned over there, and we're gonna read this. Maybe we'll read it right now so we can get it fresh in our mind. That's Luke 10, verse 41. Luke 10, verse 41. We alluded to this a couple of times, but let's read it. This is Jesus' answer to Martha's question. Martha's saying, hey, how come I'm not getting some help here? And she was all bent out of shape, and accusing Mary and so on. And Jesus saw this. And this was his answer. And it's a pretty interesting answer. Martha, Martha. Now, if you know anything about Scripture, when it repeats itself like that, it's like trying to get your attention. I mean, this is important. I'm trying to get your attention. Martha, Martha, you are worried and troubled about many things. It wasn't just about serving. That wasn't really the main issue here. You are worried and troubled about many things. So something was going on with her that was distracting her, not just this serving thing. That's how it kind of bubbled up there, but there was more to it than just this serving thing. But one thing is needed. That's an important phrase. One thing is needed. And Mary has chosen that good part, which will not be taken away from her. So he is suggesting something here, that Mary has chosen something that will not be taken away. So that tells me that Martha has chosen something that will be taken away. That's what it tells me. Now, what would be the one thing he says here that will not be taken away? That Mary was engaged in. What is that one thing he's talking about here that you can think of?
Word.
The Word, okay, what he was teaching, and which gives us what?
Faith.
Gives us faith. It's
Salvation.
salvation. It produces our salvation ultimately, through faith. It produces our salvation. That's what Mary was into here. Martha was not. She just wasn't, and Jesus said that. He says one thing is needed. So that tells me that Martha did not have that one thing that was needed. And Mary did have that one thing. We're going to be mentioning this in a couple of times here. So focus in on what he said there. I think it's important to understand what Jesus said there. This one thing is needed, which tells me that the other thing is not needed. Why wouldn't the other thing not be needed? Well, what was the other thing?
Physical.
Huh?
Physical. Something.
Yes, the physical routine of life, whatever, that's not needed. It's not. Yeah, we have to pay attention to the physical aspects of our life. That's not what he was saying, but it's not needed. Why? Why is it not needed?
It didn't matter right then.
Huh?
It didn't matter right then.
True, but I mean overall, why is it not needed?
It's temporary.
Huh?
It's temporary.
That's it. It's temporary. Martha was focused in on the temporary. And no one's criticizing her. And the author makes that point a few times. And no one's criticizing her for, doing a good work. And we're gonna look at that idea a little bit deeper here. And we've probably thought of this, I'm guessing, I know I have, of how that can get out of hand. The author, I think, calls her out of balance. I think that's kind of a good way to look at it. She was just kind of out of balance. You got to balance the physical life with your spiritual life. You just got to do that. I mean, there's just no two ways about it. And if you put the emphasis on the spiritual or physical life, well, now you got a problem. You got a problem. Once you take your eyes off the spiritual, you got a problem. So spiritual comes first. The physical things will come. They have to, because you got to live, so they'll come. But don't get wrapped up in that like Martha was. But it was more than that, I think, here for what he says there. You are troubled about many things. What those things were, I'm going to guess it all has to do with the physical aspect of her life, what was going on. That's what I would guess. And that's what Jesus was trying to bring to her. So, with that in mind, be there. Have we found the one thing? That's a good question. Have we found the one thing? But only one thing is necessary, for Mary has chosen the good part. What is the one thing? This is obviously more than telling Martha to limit her menu, although it could have had a double meaning. Jesus seems to be saying that Mary had found the singular focus of life, listening to Jesus and responding to his word. Everything else is secondary. You can underline that phrase. Everything else is secondary. Until you get your mind focused that way, you're going to be conflicting. You're just going to be conflicting the physical and the spiritual. And we really shouldn't do that. I know we do. Martha did. Probably all have done it. But we got to separate that. And we got to put the importance where it belongs. And I think the case in point here is that Martha had an opportunity that few people had. And she didn't realize. She didn't realize it. She didn't realize what she had. She was sitting at the feet of Jesus, could have learned right from God himself in the flesh. And yet she kind of passed that up. She didn't understand. She just didn't understand. Mary did. It's not that Martha's attention to service wasn't important. Nobody would say it wasn't. It was that Mary's undivided devotion to Christ was more important. Like the promise offered to Mary is the promise offered to all who choose the one thing, it will not be taken away. And that's the lesson for us. Choose the one thing. I know that's not easy, and I'm not even suggesting it is. It's a maturing process for sure. Could take some people longer than others. Maybe Martha took a little longer, for her to kind of, we don't know anything about their lives. If you look over your own life, the older you get, I think the more you kind of realize that we need to get things into balance and keep them there. And that's what Jesus was teaching here. That's why I think God chose to put this little snippet of a scene about these two women, which is like all of few verses right there, in the Bible, so that we could learn that lesson. And here we have a real life lesson with two people. And to me, that's amazing. The Bible is brief, and it doesn't waste space. The Bible doesn't waste words, doesn't waste space. So when it says something, pay attention, because he doesn't waste space. And here, now, if we didn't know anything about Martha or Mary, would we be any the worse off? I don't know. Is this kind of a lesson taught elsewhere? I think so, probably. But this was this was a lesson that's real life. This is a real life lesson. And in such a few amount of verses, we get a glimpse into this. And I think we need to stop and really absorb, what was going on right here. It's easy, I think, to pass that over. I can't say that I've ever spent an enormous amount of time on these particular verses. I'm aware of them, but this lesson here has forced me to do that. I've really spent some time thinking about this. And in John 11 and 12, and we'll maybe spend a little time there today too. Keep your life focused on Christ and Him crucified. And that's what Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians 2, 1 and 2. That's it. Jesus and Him crucified. That's what Paul says in those verses. That was it. He knew nothing among them. I think that's the way it goes in those verses. I know nothing among you except Jesus and Him crucified. Wow. So that kind of tells me where Paul's mind was at. He wasn't engaged and overly concerned about the physical aspects of life and what was going on. That's what he said. It was to be focused on Christ. That's a good verse to think about and couple in here with this. And another verse that came to my mind when he said that, and this has, I think, a little bearing to it. I didn't bother to look the verse up, but I'm sure you're aware of it. It's better to obey than sacrifice. So better to obey than to do the physical sacrifices. Isn't that what it says? It's better to obey. So we need to keep focused and to know what we need to do to gain our spiritual reward. And you're not going to do that if you're focused on this life and the physical aspects of this life. You're just not going to, because the two don't, they're separate. The one doesn't get you to the other. It just doesn't do that. And, then see there, are we focusing more on service or on worship? That's a good question. I'd underline that one. Are we focused more on service or on worship? We're going to spend a minute on that idea. I'm sure you're aware of that and have seen examples. Jesus told the Samaritan woman that God seeks true worshipers. That's what God seeks, true worshipers. In John 4 and 23, He truly found one in Mary. It's easy and now this here really gets down to it. It's easy for our busyness, even spiritual busyness, aka church work, to eclipse the devotion of our worship. Is that not true? I think that is true. I've seen examples of that. And you probably have too, I'm guessing, but I have seen where people get so tied up in the busyness of church work that I can see they're not growing spiritually. I can see it over a number of years. You kind of observe, and Some people just think, well, I'm doing God's work here. You know, I'm doing all this busy work. Kind of like Martha. I'm doing all this busy work. Well, that's just not true. Because that will not develop you spiritually. It just won't. Even if it's church work. So be careful as you grow in the church that you don't get caught up in this idea. Well, see, I'm doing this and I'm doing that, you know, and okay, I'm kind of fulfilling my role, so to speak, but you're not growing spiritually like you should.
I think there's an example of that we can see in any assembly, as you point out, that is able to happen. But we see it in the religious world as a whole, where you have so many religious bodies claiming Christ that do so many things. You know, they're feeding the poor, they're doing all these wonderful things, but that's where their focus is, and they miss the entire boat.
Yeah.
And I think that just kind of plays into.
And it happens in the church. It happens in the church. You know, I've seen it, you know, and I feel sorry, you know, that we let that happen. We see a person just get all so tied up into, quote, church work that they miss the bigger point. And that is, am I developing spiritually? These other things will come. You know, and I don't want to point out anything because we know what church work is. You know, it's just things we have to do. Nobody's saying they don't have to be done. It's just that you get so tied up into it that becomes your spiritual life, so to speak, doing these churchy work things when you should be worshiping, growing, learning. That's where your focus should be. And that's what he's saying here, and I think he's so right. So the point being, you know, are we more focused on getting ourselves spiritually right? That's where our focus should be. Are we more focused on that? And you need to ask yourself that question. Am I growing spiritually? I think you know if you're not. You know, if you're honest with yourself, you know, I think you know, and I know at points in my life I felt that I wasn't growing. And I didn't know why exactly, but I just felt I kind of hit a low point and I just wasn't growing anymore, you know. And so I had to kind of revisit things and get myself back on a track where I felt like I was, you know, growing more spiritually, because that's where our focus needs to be. And I think it's just a matter of distraction. I think basically and that's what Martha was. It was just a matter of distraction. But we get the feeling from what Jesus said there that she wasn't growing spiritually. That's what I get out of it. So it says, as a result, if we aren't careful, we can know all about the Lord and never stop long enough to know him. Boy, that's an interesting thought. That happens when we focus more on what we can do for Christ and less upon remembering what he has done for us. The former promotes actions of busyness, which may be right within themselves. No one's saying that. No one's criticizing that. While the latter promotes times of introspection, reflection, and worship, i.e. spiritual growth. We just have to keep focused on our spiritual growth. And if you are in a position, could be due to age or anything else, because we all mature differently at different times in life, you may have to spend more time on your spiritual life and just kind of let some other things go for now until you kind of get yourself, you know, squared around, and then you can devote yourself to other things. There's nothing wrong with that. But I would suggest to anybody, if you're not doing that, then you need to rethink where you're at. Don't get caught up in this idea, well, see, I'm doing this, a little thing, I'm doing that, so I'm okay, I'm spiritually right. Not true. It's just not true. It's not that works of faith are not important, again, he emphasizes that, any more than Martha's attention to serving her guests was not important. It was. It's just that worship is more important. Again, like what Helen said, you know, the emphasis should be on the spiritual and not the physical. That's a good way to put that. The emphasis is on the spiritual, not the physical. The physical things just have a way of following. Just like, I'll show you my faith by my works. What's James saying there? I'll show you my faith by my works. And I think that's kind of what he's getting at there. So, works are important. No question about it. Bible says so. But not at the expense of your spiritual life. And some people have a greater capacity than others. No one's criticizing anybody. Some people just have a greater capacity. I've seen people that I said, man, how in the world does he do all that? And, he's sharp, he knows and he just does tons of other stuff. I've seen people like that, and I said, man, he has more capacity. Don't feel bad, because I may not have that capacity. So you do with what you can with what you have, and then develop that. And that's just a good practice in anything in life. Do the best you can with what you have, and then things will have a tendency to work out. Okay. It's a matter of priorities, and that's true. That's if you want like an order how to accomplish that. It's a matter of priorities. Just get your priorities straight, And some people think they're fine, that they'll miss a Sunday worship and not even think twice about it. They're off doing who knows what. And I can't imagine they're doing anything more important than showing up for service at least once a week. I can't imagine, but people actually think that way. They just don't think twice that this is important. And yet it's the most important thing that you can do. That person is not grown spiritually. He just hasn't gotten himself to that point. So, whatever we can do, and, like through lessons, pulpit lessons is a good place, to develop that kind of thinking. Here it is, get the first one right and the others will follow, what we just said. Martha loved Jesus and her faith was real. It's important to know that. No one's saying that they don't love the Lord. No one's saying that. She allowed herself, however, to become spiritually unbalanced. Jesus' kind words of reproof serve as a reminder to all of us, and that is why this is here and recorded. That's my belief. That's why that's here. Worship is one thing, is the one thing most needed. Actions of faith must always follow through that and be subordinate to that. The Pharisees never understood that. This is a good point here. The Pharisees never understood that distinction, and as a result, went through the motions of religion while never engaging the heart. Oh, wasn't that the Pharisees? They just went through the motions of religion, but yet their heart was far from Christ. And he even said that, your heart's far from me. What's Jesus after? He's after your heart. Pure and simple. He is after your heart. Until he has your heart, then nothing is going to really matter. So that's why you got to get your heart involved. And you got to keep it involved. As soon as it's so easy to get off track. To be distracted is such an easy thing. I think it's one of Satan's tools. He just distracts us with whatever, a million different things he had to distract us. And we have to know when we're being distracted. So don't be going through the motions of religion. Don't do that. And never engaging your heart. Any questions before we get into a few questions? Okay, I didn't know I did that good a job. So, you know what they say, when no one says anything, you either did the greatest job in the world or they don't like anything you're saying. So, whatever. Okay, first question. Some of these are kind of easy. We'll just buzz through real quickly. There's a couple that are worth spending a little bit of time with. Why do we tend to take Martha's side when she was aggravated with her sister? We kind of touched on this once. Don't we have a tendency to do that? We kind of feel sorry for Martha. She's kind of getting reproved here. We feel a little sorry for her. I think we get that. We're humans. We kind of relate to that. I get that. There's nothing wrong with it. But know that, that can't be right. That's what you got to know. There's no secret there. We just kind of feel for her, oh boy, poor Martha, look what happened, here, without digging a little deeper here.
At
So,
some point, we've probably all been in that situation where we felt like we were doing it all and other people were
yeah,
holding up their end, so
right,
it resonates with us.
yeah. Okay, that's an easy one. Number 2, what do you think this is a good one. What do you think drew Jesus to their home? Now, we're not given really any information about Mary and Martha's and what they did or anything about them, how they grew up, whatever, just this little thing. Why do you think Jesus was drawn to that home? In other words, he spent some time there, how much we don't know, but it looks like it was a stopover, for when he went through the area. It would be one of those places he would stop at. Why do you think he chose them?
I always thought that it was like when he sent the 12 out and told them, if they don't want to listen to you, brush the dirt off your feet and continue on their merry little way. I have the same feeling, the same thing happened here, but Mary and Martha received him.
There you go. That's exactly it. They received him. I got 3 things that I came up with. They were very hospitable to him, first of all. In other words, they weren't, I don't know about this guy. He seems a little weird, so we'll just watch. No, they were very hospitable to him for whatever reason. I think they spent some time around him. They knew him, and maybe they followed him, for all we know. I think they probably did. They helped to provide for his needs, and he had needs, and they knew it, and so they provided for his needs. So, that's a good thing. And maybe more important, they were true believers. And Jesus knew it. Jesus knew their hearts. And they were true believers. They even said, "You're the Son of God." They even said that. So Jesus knew that. Wouldn't that kind of draw you to them? Sure it would. So they kind of had the whole thing going on there. And Jesus was attracted to that. And they provided a very good service to him. And usually, the way I understand it, when Jesus saw people like this, it gave him a lot of comfort. It's kind of like when he talked about children. I think Jesus loved to be around children. Why? Because they were sinless. They were the closest thing to sinlessness that there was on earth. And to be around children, I think, was quite a joy to Christ. And he could relate to them, and talk with them, and I think laugh with them, and even play with them, I would think. But, so I think he was attracted because of that. He was around people who truly loved him. And so he asked the question, would he be drawn to you? Yeah, that's the question. Would he be drawn to you? So you got to answer that question for yourself. Number 3, read between the lines of Mary and Martha's rebuke, of Mary. What tells you that she lost her focus? Okay, we kind of discussed that. We understand that. I don't think we need to spend any time there. We see why. And she just kind of passed up a good opportunity there. Okay, number 4, discuss the difference seen in the 2 sisters in John 11. Okay, now we get over to John 11. We get a little bit more information, and let's see here. John 11 verses, let's see here, where am I at? I lost my place. John 11, the scene where Jesus arrives after the death of Lazarus. Let's see, what are we looking for? It's the verse where Martha, see, it was that Mary who anointed, this was the Mary who anointed the Lord's feet before. There in verse 3, the sister was sent to him saying, "Behold, your love," I don't see where am I looking for? Jesus glorified through it. When he heard they were sick, so this is the episode where Jesus learns of Lazarus' sickness. And so we go on down further, and it says, now in Bethany, he's back to Bethany. So we know Lazarus lived in the same town that Mary and Martha did. We know that much. And now it says in verse 20, now Martha, as soon as she heard, this is interesting, as soon as she heard that Jesus was coming, so somebody told her, went to meet him. But Mary was sitting in the house. Now, I don't know what you can draw from that, but Mary was sitting in the house. Now, Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now, I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you. So now we get a little bit of an insight into how she was thinking. So she was thinking right. She really was. If you wouldn't have been here, but I know God will do anything that you want. I know that. So Jesus said, your brother will rise again. She says, okay, in the resurrection. He says, no, he's going to rise. In the resurrection, you go down to 28. And when she had said these things, she went her way and secretly, I don't know why that's in it, and secretly called Mary, her sister, saying, the teacher has come and is calling for you. As soon as she heard that, she arose quickly and came to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the town, but was in a place where Martha met him. Then the Jews who were with her in the house and comforting her, Lazarus had died, don't forget, when they saw that Mary rose up quickly and went out, and followed her, saying, she is going to the tomb to weep there. Then when Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she fell down to his feet, saying, Lord, if you had not been here. She says the same exact thing that Martha says. If he would have been here, he would not have died. Interesting that they both came to that same conclusion. I think it's kind of an interesting point. And so then it goes on to where Jesus raises Lazarus. So, what was Martha doing in John 12? Okay, in John 12 now, let's see here. In John 12 now, it says that Mary in verse 3, let's go up to 2. There they made him a supper, and Martha served. Interesting. Martha served. But Lazarus, who was now raised, was one of those who sat at the table. Then Mary took a pound of very costly oil of spikenard, anointing the feet of Jesus. This would be for the second time. What did Mary do? It says, what was Martha doing in these verses in 12? What was Martha doing? Again, she was serving. Okay, whatever. She was serving. And what did Mary do that earned the rebuke of Judas? If we read down further, we'll see, this is where Judas comes in and
Used this costly oil that he said they could have sold.
yeah, like that really meant something to him,
Right.
But that's what he said. Now, this was the second time Mary did this, so she was being criticized a second time. Basically, she was kind of being criticized. What did Martha say about? Let's see here. What did Martha say about Mary's distraction and devotion on that occasion? What did Martha say about Mary, about her devotion on that occasion? This is in 12. You see anything? She didn't say anything. She didn't say anything. That's the point here. This time, she didn't say anything. She got criticized by Judas. So the answer there would be nothing. She didn't get criticized. Martha maybe learned her lesson, and maybe I shouldn't do that, and so she didn't criticize her. And what lessons can we learn? We've kind of talked about what lessons can we learn. Again, it's better to focus on Jesus first. That's kind of the lesson there. And again, that's what Mary was doing. She was just so devoted. She was all in.
Not to take us back too far, but when you had wondered why she had went to her sister, who was it? Martha went to Mary secretly, or was it the other way around?
Yeah, see, Martha went to Mary secretly.
So in the preceding verses, it was talking about how the people in that area sought to stone Christ. So maybe that was one of the reasons why.
Yeah, maybe,
Because
yeah,
she was trying to not cause a stir.
it could be. Yeah, I'm not sure what the,
I wanted to say that a long time ago, but then I didn't.
yeah. Yeah, I kind of wondered about that word, secretly. I'm not quite sure what's going on there. Maybe we don't have enough information. So that's that. And that's all we have about these two. That's all we have. So number 6, practice hospitality. And this is just kind of a general thought here. In our busy times, we have dismissed this admonition with the excuse, hospitality means more than having people in your home. Okay, that's true. Here's a question. Would it a part of hospitality include having people in your home? Well, yeah, I guess that would be true. Probably don't do much of that anymore. Discuss the excuses for why we fail to open our homes. Evidently, the author feels that way too. Why do we fail to open our homes and share our blessings with others? I don't know who these others are that he's talking about here. I underlined that word others. Who are these others he's talking about? I mean, are we calling people off the street, or who's these others? Is it other church people or friends, or who's he talking about here? Little vague there. But then he says, what is the real meaning of hospitality? That's kind of a good question. That's what this is all about. Martha and and Mary, were creating this hospitable situation. So, do we know what the definition or the meaning, the real meaning of that word hospitality is? I thought this was a trick question, so I looked it up. I says, boy, I didn't think this would be so hard here, but maybe this is a trick question. So I looked it up, and what is your thought, what is your definition, of hospitality? It's not a trick question. I'll tell you, it's not a trick question. I just
It's
thought it
real
might.
short. Being hospitable.
Oh yeah, being hospitable. Hospitality. What does that mean to you? Hospitality.
To show love to your neighbor?
I think that's good.
Sharing? You're sharing your home, your food, whatever.
Sharing with others,
Serving others.
serving others. I got providing for the needs of others. That's what I got when I looked up the word. It was kind of like providing the needs for others. Could be anybody. Of course, they were doing that here, with Jesus. And maybe the apostles, they're not mentioned here in these passages, but they must have been somewhere. Maybe not in the home, but I don't know. But they were providing this hospitality. And we have other words that come from that word, like hospital. Well, what happens in a hospital? Well, they take care of your needs, Hospice. Hospice. What do they do in hospice? Well, they take care of your needs. We should be hospitable. That's kind of the bottom line here. We should be hospitable. Christians should be hospitable in whatever way you can. I wouldn't just say invite strangers off the street, although, I don't know, I wouldn't argue with it. But I'd be a little careful about, you think about the Good Samaritan and all that, he didn't ask questions or anything, maybe we shouldn't either, maybe we do, but we see a lot of bad things. But, that's something I think we at least ought to keep in our minds, that, we ought to have that hospitality kind of feature about us as Christians. We need to do that. And we can do it in many ways. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to invite somebody in your home. It doesn't necessarily mean that. It's just how you can spread that hospitality.
It used to be, and I wasn't part of it, but it used to be not that old. Everybody be quiet. That there were times when the gospel meetings that were going on, and I'm not talking about the ones in modern times where we can hop in our car and in 5 or 10 minutes be 50 miles or 20 miles away from where we were. But the fact that somebody would leave early in the morning to be at a gospel meeting, let's say maybe started at noon and lasted until, 5, 6, 7, maybe 8 o'clock in the evening, and then maybe not head on home, but be invited into somebody else's home, because the meeting was still continued on. We just don't have that.
No, things have changed. I remember growing up with that all the time, and things have changed. That's a fact. Okay, so that would be the end of Martha and Mary. I think it was a very good study for just a few short verses. We get a lot out of that. Next week, our last one will be Mary Magdalene, and that'll be again 2 weeks, and that'll be the end of our study for now. And then I'll be on vacation the following week, so I'll turn it over to you, maybe whomever wants to step in at that point. So that's where we're at. Okay.
Good evening again. As we close out our time together here this evening, I want to kind of keep on some of the same, touch a little bit on the same topics that we've been talking about here this evening. I invite you to turn to Colossians chapter 1, and we're going to read there for just a moment as we think on these things and offer the invitation of Christ. So Colossians chapter 1, starting at verse 9, says, "For this reason we also, since the day we heard it, do not cease to pray for you and ask that you may be filled with the knowledge of his will, in all wisdom and spiritual understanding, that you may walk worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing him, being fruitful in every good work, and increasing in the knowledge of God, strengthened with all might, according to his glorious power, for all patience and long-suffering with joy, giving thanks to the Father, who has qualified us to be partakers of the inheritance of the saints in the light." As we read that passage, I can't help but think about the things we've been talking about here today, especially as we were back there talking about Mary and Martha and talking about that one thing. And Jim, perhaps one of the reasons I was being quiet over there is because I wanted to talk about this now and I didn't want to give away too much. but that idea is so full of things that will preach, if you will. And there in Luke 10 at verse 42, when we talked about earlier about one thing is needed, and the author of the lesson that we were in, and Jim, well pointed out that, that if you take care of that one thing, then everything else just kind of follows. And thinking about what we're told here in Colossians, or what Paul was telling the saints and brethren at Colossae to do, was to continue to seek after that one thing, to seek after the Word, to look into the Word and to fill themselves up with it, so that they would have in verse 9, that you may be filled with the knowledge of his will in all wisdom and spiritual understanding. And there's just so much that can be said there as we think about what the Lord wants from his people, what he wants from all mankind. And as it has been mentioned, there are so many people that as it was mentioned in the study again, that are so busy in religious things that they miss the entire point of the whole thing. That it is the things of Christ that need to be taken care of first. And we all need, of course, a place to live. We're told in the scriptures, if we do not work, we will not eat. So, of course, there's work that needs to be done, but first things first, and that we should be seeking after the Lord putting ourselves in the right place as far as the Lord and what He sees in us and what He desires of us, filling our hearts with the Word so that we might become stronger and wiser. And in all of those things, if we put the Word in us and we come to know Christ and we're obedient to Him, then, well, guess what? We will work. We will not leave our families behind and destitute. We will work. We will take care of all of the other things that need to be done. We will be just like, to use the examples of Mary and Martha again, we will be the Marthas that will tend to the things that need to be tended to, but we'll also have that heart of Mary that sees the importance of these spiritual things that need to be done. And when you think of the church and you think of all the confusion that has happened in the world, one of the things that the Lord did to kind of stave those things off is in the organization of the church. He's given some to do all of these different jobs, so that as one body, we work together to make all of these things happen amongst this group. But the Lord has that plan. The Lord has that plan, and He desires that we, as we've been reading here in Colossians, that we should be filled with the knowledge of His will. And realizing, yes, He was talking to the church at Colossae, but these things fast forward to us today, and these apply in our lives today, that we should also be those that are filled with the knowledge of His will, that we might walk worthy, in verse 10, being fully pleasing to Him, strengthened in verse 11, and most of all, remembering where all of these things come from. They come from the Lord. So as we close down our thoughts here this evening, let's remember these things. Let's remember to do a better job. No matter how good we're doing at these things, we can always do better at studying. We can always do better at coming to a greater knowledge of the truth and making sure that we're following through with those things that the Word and the Lord desires that we do. So if there be anybody among us here today that has not put on Christ, and you've heard the Word has taken hold in your heart, and you realize that, I need to do something about this, like those on the day of Pentecost who asked, what must we do to be saved? Like the one, the Ethiopian eunuch in Acts chapter 8, who came to a point after having heard about Christ, came to the point of realization that he needed to do something. He needed to be baptized for the remission of sins. In every case, there was that hearing and the understanding, putting that word in their heart. They believed that Christ is, and then they were willing to do differently in the future. They were willing to confess Him before men and not be ashamed, and to walk according to His purpose. They're in line with that obedience, that continual obedience, being faithful until death, as we find written in Revelation 2, verse 10, as we often mention. So if there's anybody here tonight that needs to put on Christ in baptism, or anybody that hears this lesson later on, if you desire to study and to know more of Christ, and you desire to put on Christ in baptism, we would be glad and excited to help you in that regard. For the rest, if you've put on Christ previously, but you found that you're in one of those, as Jim pointed out, each and every one of us has those times in our lives where we have been felt a little weaker along the way, where the world has beaten us down a little bit and we don't feel as strong in the faith as perhaps we should. Well, that's what we have here among us. We have a family to help hold each other up. Where one of us gets weak, the other can help lift us up. And so if you have a need, let that be known, that we might pray with you and for you, that you would not fall from grace, and that if you have gone astray, that you might be forgiven and added again to the Lord's church. So if if whatever your need may be, please let it be known as we stand and sing.
Jesus is tenderly calling thee home, calling today, calling today. Why from the sunshine of love wilt thou roam, farther and farther away? Calling today, calling today. Jesus is calling, is tenderly calling today. Jesus is calling the weary to rest, calling today, calling today. Bring him thy burden and thou shalt be blessed. He will not turn you away. Calling today, calling today. Jesus is calling today, is tenderly calling today. Jesus is waiting, he'll come to him now, waiting today, waiting today. Come with thy sins at his feet lowly bow, come and no longer delay.